Thanks, Kelly. At your table, there's a series of handouts. The green link, a little paper clip, and there's also a chapter out of a book called Lessons from the Portland Experience. And most of what I'm going to say can be found in these handouts. The Lessons from the Portland Experience is actually from a book published 10 years ago by Heritage Foundation and PERC, A Guide to Smart Growth. I wrote a chapter, and rereading it recently, figured almost everything in here is as valid today as what I wrote 10 years ago. So if you haven't yet bought your Christmas gifts, this would be, I'm sure, a fascinating, well-received gift for all of your friends. Not that I would profit from it at all. I don't. Somebody would, I suppose. But it's all in there. As Kelly mentioned, I have spoken in a lot of different states, trying to get people to understand that most of what they think they know about Portland is wrong. But this is the only time I think where I've come to a state after 100 of their top civic leaders came to Portland. The Atlanta Link Group came back in '05, and they got the full-on 2.5-day Walt Disney tour of Portland, because there is, Portland's internationally prominent, as they all like to remind themselves back there. And so we have a whole cottage industry of people who cater to the out-of-towners and trying to get them to realize that they furiously work to promote what we're doing in Portland. And occasionally, for those out-of-towners who actually undertake due diligence to realize they're about to be completely played, they sometimes contact me or somebody like me to maybe have one little contrarian speech in there. And so I was asked to speak. I think I got 45 minutes on the agenda of the 2 days of the Atlanta Link Group. And fortunately, I was in the second day, so the first day I went and I listened to some of the things that were going to be said on my topic by people who don't agree with me, and I got to hear all the things that they say. It's really just astounding the way they just lie about Portland. And it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz situation. You see the sound and fury, and you don't realize, well, there's some little guy behind a curtain furiously trying to make people realize what's going on, or have an image of what's going on. And it's really, most of it is not true. So I'm going to, in my brief time today, there's so much, almost any of these subtopics, whether it's hot lanes, growth boundaries, transit-oriented development. You can make that the whole topic of the speech. We don't have time for that, so that's why I have these handouts. And I'll just quickly summarize. I'll also say I'm going to speak for about 7 or 8 more minutes, and I'm going to do a little PowerPoint presentation. I don't actually really like PowerPoint most of the time, because people get abused with all the tiny little font and bullet points and that kind of stuff. But in this speech, it's important because there's a lot of photos in there, and you need to see the visual of what's going on in Portland, and then I'll wrap up with some non-PowerPoint stuff. Probably the things that Portland is most well known for is regional governance and state-mandated land use planning, including an urban growth boundary that makes it illegal to build almost anything most of the time in most lands, and creates an urban land cartel, as I would refer to it. And then we have a regional transit agency with an obsession with slow trains, not going very many places, but costing vast amounts of money, and then trying to downsize roads and highways and make congestion as bad as possible. I guess that's not the way they would put it in Portland, but that's what's actually going on. So I was prompted 3 weeks ago seeing a news article from the New York Times that 2 taxi medallions, which allow you to operate taxi service in New York City, recently sold for $1 million a piece. And if you don't have a taxi medallion, then you cannot have any taxis. And it's a straight cartel. It's enforced by the government. It's all crony capitalism. And the people noted that 10 years ago, a medallion was worth $100,000, but now it's worth $1 million. Now, why would that be? Well, because it's a cartel. Demand is rising, and supply is constant. And this works to the benefit of the current members of the cartel. It just doesn't work very well for everybody else. And I thought, now that's the future of Portland land prices under our world-famous regional governance and urban growth boundaries, because the urban growth boundary creates an urban land cartel. And there's no doubt that even in today's depressed real estate market, property inside the growth boundary zone for single-family housing is worth 10 to 15 times land only a couple hundred yards away outside the growth boundary that is just some scenic view shed for people living in the next suburban development. And if you take it to its logical conclusion, given that the expansion of the urban growth boundary, which was supposed to work as some kind of rational process where you expand to always have enough adequate land, that has never worked rationally, of course. The future of Portland real estate is that raw dirt will become as outrageously overpriced as a taxi medallion in New York City. And once you get deep enough into this paradigm, you can't get out. Just imagine Mayor Bloomberg in New York City saying, hey, you know what? Taxi medallion of $1 million, that's kind of stupid. Why don't we just deregulate the market and let the market determine how many taxis should be in the city? Well, the guys who just paid $1 million to get in the club, their medallion will be worthless. They're not going to be very happy about that. So once you get in really deep in any kind of cartel, you can't deregulate. You've now you've created this bubble. And that's what's happening in Portland. And this is not a surprise. Back in the early 90s, see, we're way ahead of Atlanta in adopting all these foolish policies. And they were studied back then. And there was an Oregon housing cost study done in 1998 in which a whole bunch of interest groups across the political spectrum put in money, and then they paid some private defenders, they all agreed would be okay, to analyze this, and they concluded that, quote, the land-related costs are the most notable rising component of production costs in housing. In particular, raw land rose from 56% to more than 200% over a 4-year period, after accounting for inflation. Well, Metro's own consultants, even earlier, in 1994, just prior to adopting their big 2040 growth vision, the big 50-year sort of religious vision for the future that they adopted in 1995, their own consultants said that if the plan was adopted, it would result in, quote, reduced average lot sizes, a decreased percentage of households owning their own homes, increased percentages of household income spent on housing, and increased number of housing units that will require subsidy. I view every one of those things as socially undesirable. But this is what they were specifically planning. Their own economists in-house also stated that year, quote, the data suggests a public welfare trade-off for increased density and reduced vehicle miles traveled. And these are two of the key things they're trying for. More density, reductions in driving. The downside of pursuing such objectives appears to be higher housing prices and reduced housing output. They knew this was going to happen. At this time, I was working for the Oregon Environmental Council. I was quoting this back to them in my testimony. Actually, I didn't, because my own board of directors censored that part of my testimony, which was the sign to me that it was time to get out of the environmental movement, which I did. And eventually, fortuitously, got hired at Cascade. But there's no learning going on in Portland. They don't seem to understand this really, really obvious point, that if demand is rising and supply is constant, then the commodity you're talking about is going to go up in price. And as recently as September of this year, a committee to Metro, our regional government, suggested that the tiny amount of land that we allow in the growth boundary on the periphery of the area in the future be mandatorily zoned for 22 units per acre. Well, that's the end of single-family homes. That's all townhouses and row houses. Fortunately, that particular recommendation was rejected by Metro. They thought it was a bit high. They'd probably go for 15 or 12 or something, some other absurd thing. But traditionally, for as long as cities have been growing, as they grow, you take cheap, underutilized farmland on the periphery, you have cheap dirt, and that allows you to constantly prevent a bubble in housing. They specifically want a bubble in housing in Portland. They say they don't, but obviously by their policies they do. Transit issues, again, Portland is world famous. We have a commitment to light rail and lots of money. And if you look at this green sheet in particular, you can just see that, well, the green sheet doesn't show, but the transit market share after 30 years is stagnant. And in the first two graphs, you'll see that service over time, the actual service on the road has declined ever since we had a payroll tax rate increase back in '04, which sent more money to TriMet. And the next graph shows the amount of revenue flowing to TriMet has been going up. They've had a gusher of cash. And the service is going down. Partly because light rail is so vastly expensive that it's cannibalizing service, and partly because TriMet has the most luxurious cost of fringe benefits of any transit district in the country. If you look at the bottom part of that first page, you can see that now fringe benefits account, the cost of them equal 163% of wages. I've never heard of that. Even in that industry, the second closest in the entire industry, the New York City Transit District, spends about 89% of wages on benefits. 163%, and a decade ago it was only 60%. How can that be feasible? Well, it's not. TriMet is headed towards insolvency. They have $1.2 billion of off-book debt for post-employment obligations, and if they were required to bring that on the books today, which they're not, they would be bankrupt. We're building a new bridge over the Willamette River, the first bridge in 40 years. Only for trains, no cars allowed. The whole thing is ludicrous. You could spend more time reading that if you want. Maybe now I'll turn to the slideshow here. My professional interest. Now that I'm CEO, I'm sort of part of my day is being a bureaucrat, supervising people, and those kinds of things. The little bit of research that I have retained has been my interest in transit-oriented development and in transit generally. For a long time, I've been curious to know, well, if we do what the planners want us to do, which is to have increased density, light rail transit, lots of subsidies, especially get these high-density mixed-use facilities right at transit stations, the claim is that people will change the way they live and drive less. So I have been going out and taking pictures and doing research and interviewing people for a lot of the transit-oriented developments in Portland, and I just asked the question, well, I know what all you planners said was going to happen. I just want to know, did it happen? And I'm not interested in surveys. A lot of my academic friends in Portland do surveys of people to ask them how they travel. In my experience, when you just watch people, how they drive or how they travel is not the same as how they say they travel, because they know that the politically correct response is in Portland, oh yes, sure, I take the train all the time. Go there at 6 in the morning, just watch the development, okay? Not happening. So I don't care what you say, I only care what you do. And the people need to understand, planners need to understand this is not working the way they thought. So let's see if this works properly. Anyway, and if some of these lights can be shut out, you might see this a little better, but I'll let you decide. We were governed, most people haven't heard of the Loop Track project. There was a project actually of a land use planning group called 1000 Friends of Oregon. The publication date here is 1997, but its policy impact actually goes back to around 1990. There was a proposed highway project, a very important highway project on the west side of Portland. They were opposed to it, as they're opposed to basically all highway projects. And we haven't opened a new highway in Portland since 1982, which is one reason why we have such bad congestion. And they hired some of the top new urbanist planners. And their hypothesis was, look, if we stopped highway building in Washington County on the west side, and if we could do utopian new urbanist planning throughout the entire county, then we could have a significant decline in driving and a significant increase in transit. So they published this, they accomplished their goal. The governor back in the late 80s and early 90s, the two governors, killed the project. Politically, highway building is pretty much dead. In Portland, that's considered just so 20th century. We're in the 21st century now. People get around by skateboard and bike and scooter and walking and whatever, as long as it's not a car. That's kind of their goal. And so this report was published. And you can see these bars here. It just indicates that the transit mode share, in their view, was going to, and the driving share was going to be substantially different than traditional suburbia. They were convinced that on a good day, average, if you did all the things they said, the transit mode share would go up to about 28% of trips at these transit-oriented developments. So I have monitored some of these projects over time. This is an aerial view. Light rail goes here, There's all these specific products around it, which we don't have time to go into this morning. But this was one, this was the first highly acclaimed suburban Todd project in the entire Portland region. Where this is built was considered then the absolute best piece of dirt on the entire West Side light rail expansion. The light rail line opened in 1998. It was planned in the 90s. Unlike any other light rail line in the country, this was deliberately run not where people are. It was run through a bunch of cow pastures and woodlots with the intention that if we build it, they will come. We'll use the power of zoning to force only high-density development. In fact, the federal government was so dubious of this that Portland was required to sign a contract, essentially saying we will do whatever it takes to cram high-density development down the throats of our own citizens if you give us money to build this train. That's how it worked. So they did this. So I took this photo as it was being built in 1996. You have all on about you have these retail projects with apartments on top. Now this is in suburbia, so this is a really high-density product. But all the planners are obsessed with mixed use. You have to have people living above retail with some kind of 1950s vision of the world. And so here's the way it is today. Every retail storefront is vacant. They have almost never been occupied. Occasionally there's been a pizza joint, a little coffee place, a year later it goes out of business. The entire model never made sense. I actually interviewed one of the pension fund managers who put money into this project. He's from Houston, and he just laughed and he said, "No, we made other people pay for that. We knew that would never work." But in Portland, we all believe in ourselves. We're all above average in Portland. It's kind of a big city, and so there you see and I occasionally will call these people every couple of years to ask them how the leasing is going, and they always have the same answer. Well, we've practically given the stuff away, but there's no parking, there's no market, and it's just a waste of money. There is actually a parking. It's a free parking ride. So the only reason that most people take the train is because they're bribed with free parking. And here, this is a 6-acre lot right here. There's a train heading to Portland, which is over here. Nike World Campus is beyond those trees. And if you just came to Portland and you got the tour, you wouldn't know the backstory here. The reason I'm including this is, well, the 6 acres is, the train stop is right at the edge of the screen. The stop is right there. This is the best piece of dirt that planners had in the mid-1990s. We're supposed to have the whole utopian Todd thing. What happened? I call a developer. Say you got 6 acres. It's flat. You have the train. Why aren't you developing? And he said, look, we're pragmatic. We actually think light rail is an amenity. But the city has overlaid density requirements that make it infeasible and parking restrictions. But out here, if you're going to build commercial, which is what we would build, you need to have about 4.3 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. They're going to put a cap of 2.8. Lenders are not going to go for that kind of project. That's the answer. So it opened in 1998. It's 2011. 6 acres. It's a great place to walk your dog, toss a frisbee. Someone's eating money, carrying costs. Planners in Portland would rather impose their top-down requirements for density and parking and kill the project and have nothing done than to simply let the market work. Because they're confident they know way more about how things should happen than those morons who are just bankers and investment fund people and builders and developers who just respond to markets. Planners always think they know more than markets. So as a result, in this case, they have nothing. Nike World Campus, a huge complex, 8,000 or so employees. It's a little far to walk, and so they run a shuttle. They got a state-subsidized shuttle that continuously goes from here to the light rail station. About every 4 or 5 minutes you can get a shuttle. And I'm sure if you surveyed people who actually work at Nike, the young progressive crowd, many of them would say that they think the train is a good idea. But we actually monitored. There's only 4 entrances to the Nike campus. It's pretty obvious how people come and go. That you don't just wander in. It's a pretty secure place. Yeah, 97% of the trips in and out at the peak hour are all single occupant vehicles. It doesn't matter. They get a whole annual transit pass for $35, which I would have to pay $1,000 for, and that they have a shuttle, free shuttle to and from transit, and that they believe transit is a good idea. What they really mean is they think it's a good idea for someone else, but for them it's not working. Well, that's the problem. So here's the mode split. Max is down so low you can't even see it. Okay, they made a heroic effort, and the mode split in the morning for all of the projects around there are almost all auto-oriented. About half a mile away, here's the train going west, and then here's a project here and these different products. So I always like to take these photos in real time because you can't get them later. I especially love this type of thing here, where you have the architectural renderings. They're always kind of hilarious because you can't see very well, I guess. But you have green trees, and out here there's a high density development, and here's the train, and there's little citizens, and it never rains in Portland when you look at these renderings. And if you came up here and looked at this carefully, the one thing you would not see in this warm and fuzzy vision of the future is there are no cars and there's no parking, because this is the new Portland, where we know that's all in the past, and that's how they sell it to politicians at the time they're going to do it. Well, this was in 1997, and the first developer went bankrupt for a variety of reasons. The project never made any financial sense, and that's about 2000, still bankrupt. The tarps are looking a little ragged. That's about 2001. The water protection system isn't working too well, actually. Still waiting. And then they finally, in about 2002, they couldn't get anybody in Portland to take it up, so they got a developer out of California to come up and take it over. And that's the way it was a year ago when they were having to redo the entire, this is all black mesh over here, because as the developer himself admitted at a public forum one time when he was still trying to say how great this was, he said, yeah, you know, when you buy up a project as is, it really means as is, including all the water damage. Well, that guy is now bankrupt. And what you see, all these parking spaces. Oh, private parking, gated parking. Parking structure, the biggest single structure in the entire suburban community of Beaverton. Structured parking, we're talking $35,000, $40,000 per stall. Yeah, that wasn't in those architectural renderings, remember? Cars, that was a 20th century thing. We're way beyond that now. No, there's tons of parking here. Oh, valet parking at the 24-hour fitness. That was kind of comical at one point. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. And the Hummer, of course, yeah. Oh, well, come on, there's a couple bikes there. No parking. No 24-hour fitness parking. There's so many cars there, they have to put up all these ugly signs. No, get away, we have a train here. You're supposed to be taking the train. Not getting the message. Oh yeah, the usual retail leasing problems. And this is an aerial view. Here's the train. Here's a mud pit. And then over here, they actually got $4 million of subsidies from our regional government, Metro, to tear down a movie theater, because it was just a one-story movie theater in a big parking lot, and they decided that this project called the Beaverton Round was such a success that they were going to condemn the theater and tear it down so they could expand it. Expand this Beaverton Round project. Expand it. The whole thing is a failure. It's still not expanded to this day. It's ludicrous. And again, here's the mode split. If you just go and you just watch how people travel, auto mode split, max, tiny amount of people taking the train. Nearby, Monica Station, this whole area right here was all raw dirt at the time. This was part of the strategy. You run a train through cow pastures and you create the Field of Dreams. And interestingly, in the Lutrac project, which I mentioned earlier, the 1,000 Friends of Oregon and Big Utopian Vision, they actually modeled specifically. They knew this was going to happen. And they, as always, this is the Peter Calthorpe. He's a California new urbanist planner. He's kind of the high priest of urbanism. And they hired him to come in. They always have these different products, you know, more density here, less density over here. It's kind of calm and soothing, and there's no cars and no parking. And they predict a 28% transit mode share for this particular station. So it's built out, and this is what you get mostly, high density products. Can't see this too well, but this is about a 5-minute walk away, more high density products. These are condos, and this is the TriMet parking ride, and then light rail is right here, so you can literally get out of bed, walk across the parking lot, and get on the train. This is as dense as you're going to get in suburbia. And so these are 4 of the units. I actually have monitored a lot more, but the slide is already too complex. So basically, you can just see, although there's some variation, the condos had a better transit mode split. By and large, no matter how much density you have and how much train service you provide, when people get up in the morning for peak hour, they may say to themselves that the train is a good idea and they like to take it, so they look at their schedule and it doesn't work. And I should say, by the way, I love trains. I would have taken the MARTA to my hotel last night if it had come here. I've done it before. Everywhere I fly in the country, when I can take a train to my hotel, I do. I grew up near New York City, in New Jersey, and have trains everywhere. So it's not that I'm anti-train. I actually am kind of a train nut. But for most parts of the country, they don't make any sense. And light rail, in particular, is just a horrible idea. It's so slow and inflexible and massively expensive and low capacity that by any criteria it makes no sense whatsoever. Okay, so another project that you probably have heard about, Orenco Station. This is really, when the people from Atlanta came 5 years ago, they probably got a little tour out to Orenco Station because it's world famous. And actually, it's a project on the south side that's not as famous, but is more dense, and that's of interest to me. So here you have these, it says like someone went to Brooklyn or Philadelphia and picked up a block and went out to Oregon and plunked it down in a cow pasture. The whole thing is such a shock. I don't really get it, but they're trying to create these eastern type of neighborhoods. There's more. Again, this was all, most of these are all subsidized because the market will not bear this kind of density out in suburbia, so they put public money into it. I mean, this is incredible. The train runs right behind these row houses. So you can get out of bed and roll right in there. And, oh, there's a little park. If you have kids, you can find some tiny little place for them. But most TODs are child-free zones. And here's, if you live in that development, you walk up here to the train. It's a perfect funnel. So if you want to know what the train ridership is in the morning, you just sit there, and everybody's going to use the train, goes right through there. It's very convenient. So I monitored quite a bit here, which I don't do for all the projects, but I monitored AM peak, PM peak, weekend, midday, and midday. And it fluctuates, but I tell you, as soon as you get past the morning weekday peak, it's all auto all the time. But no matter how you do it, the auto mode share is way over 80%. And you can try, you can densify, you can build row houses in suburbia, you provide a train, but people don't change their habits much. All the work sites, Nike, Intel, a bunch of others, we did some counts there, 7,100 trips on a typical weekday morning, and Max gets about 5% of the market share. So when you look at this kind of project and you wonder what's gone wrong, this is my final slide. This is true basically everywhere. There's a correlation between density and cost. 2-story, 3-story, 4-story, 5-story. A lot of people like to say sprawl is too expensive. Well, density costs money. When you build up rather than out, the product you're building is going to cost more per square foot. You have some of the highest unionized labor costs in the country. If you're talking about crane operators and iron workers, you're going to have possibly prevailing wage laws. You're going to have concrete. Concrete, steel is expensive. Structured parking, massively expensive. Okay, this is very expensive. So I'll just leave that slide there and wrap up by saying that the Brookings Institute, when looking at the 2000 data for the census, noted that cities built for cars grew, but cities designed for mass transit and pedestrians tended to shrink. So the Portland model is not working, and I think people came out to Portland from Atlanta. I tried to tell them that. I don't think they got the message very well, because when I look at the 2040 vision you have here and all the other documents that I've reviewed here, it seems like you're not learning the right lessons, or at least a lot of people are not learning the lessons from Portland. And my own comments about solutions would be, I'm a big fan of congestion pricing, and you're ahead of us here. You have converted a HOV to a hot lane, which is kind of a little halfway house to where you really need to go. I would say 20 years from now, all the limited access highways will have no gas tax money, no subsidies, and then they will all be toll roads, electronic tolling, peak period price, which is necessary, which tells you when and where to expand highways and who is willing to pay for them. All that is important. Highway capacity, new highway capacity is needed. Motorists have a very high willingness to pay for roads as long as you give them what they want: speed and reliability. When people say that, well, you can't pull your way out of congestion, that's just silly. Of course you can. But you have to give people a chance to vote with their dollars for that. When people get on a freeway and it's perceived to be free and they're paying through a backdoor tax mechanism, then there's no way for them to vote with their dollars for what they want at that moment. Transit, you need to look at contracting out, privatization, and something like a rapid bus model. There's a great model in Los Angeles where they've tried everything in Los Angeles and they get not much respect, but they have a thing called Metro Rapid, hundreds of lane miles, or hundreds of miles of service of simply a bus that has stops spaced 1 mile apart instead of every 2 or 3 blocks, and it has its own look to it. It's kind of a cool bus system. And for about $330,000 a mile, they've implemented this. I went down to LA, I tried it. I tried all the stuff in LA, but I tried that, and it works pretty well. Just keep in mind, $330,000 a mile to implement a rapid bus system compared to Milwaukee Light Rail in Portland, which we're now building at a cost of $205 million per mile. $205 million versus $330,000. And if we ever build light rail across the river to Vancouver, Washington, it's already estimated to be $321 million a mile. I'll just say, if you actually tried to spend that much money on improved bus service, even if you bought the kind of bus that President Obama rides in, which is a pretty tricked out bus, I'm sure if you get on it, it's really cool. It's got a lot of amenities. It costs $1.1 million. Okay, so if you tried to spend $321 million per mile on bus service, you actually couldn't spend it. You would run out of ways to spend the money, short of hiring a helicopter and flying around Atlanta and shoving $100 bills out the window. You couldn't spend it all. And yet in Portland, we're going to do that for a slow train that is actually going to cannibalize existing, superior, faster bus service. So time is running out. You may have some questions. I'd love to talk to you. But my point is, you are doing some good things here that move towards congestion pricing. The acknowledgement that pricing is important is great, because they don't acknowledge that in Portland at all. In Atlanta, you're coming ahead. And otherwise, the whole top-down central planning thing is not working, and I hope you get that lesson from the Portland experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ania?
I have to have the first question. What is the average speed of the light rail?
Depends on where you are. On average, it's about 15 miles an hour. But if you're in the central core, the central city, go off.
Go ahead.
You have an effective way of shutting speakers off here. In downtown Portland, it's about 5 miles an hour. So if you're in the city center, you can walk faster than the train. The same is true for the streetcar, which is a comically poor expenditure. So, if you're in the New York City subway, or if you're on MARTA, which is heavy rail products, at least when you're on them, it makes you feel like you're going somewhere. If you're on the subway, especially the express subway of New York, it's an awesome feeling to know up above you they're going slow and you're going fast. But light rail is a surface system, so when you creep through downtown Portland, it's just a torturous experience. Sir?
The information you presented is compelling. What kind of answers do the other people say? How do they defend what they do?
They don't feel a need to defend. They're Portland.
Okay.
It's people from all around the country are coming to see us. Atlanta come to see us. Austin, every week someone comes to see us. So, John, you're obviously wrong. And literally, not because I spent 20 years of my life in the environmental movement, I know a lot of these people. I used to socialize with them. It's very threatening to them that I know what they're doing, and that I go out and get real data, which they don't. So they do not engage. They do not engage. I give many more speeches like I'm giving here out of state than I give in Oregon. Actually, I was a keynote speaker at a transportation conference 2 years ago talking about this very thing, and the audience was ODOT, WashDOT, and academics. Hundreds of people there. It's a pretty big deal. And they wanted my session. They liked it so much they wanted to elevate it to a plenary, and they wanted to have a point-counterpoint and asked me if I minded. No, bring it on. They could not find a single person in Oregon willing to be up there with me. They had to bring in a guy from California whose speech wasn't even about what I was talking about. No one in Oregon who is making money off all this stuff and promoting it is willing to stand up and defend it against an informed critic. They don't feel they need to.
John, we've got millions of more people projected to come to Atlanta. We've got an elderly, growingly older population. Doesn't there need to be some kind of transit choice? And what do you say to people that say, we aren't going to, buses are old school. We're not going to be able to get people out of their cars to ride a bus. We've got to have the rail because that's the only thing that people will ride.
I think they're just wrong. Rail doesn't take you from many places to many places. Door-to-door delivery and convenience is what people want. So when my parents were in their last 10 years in Florida living in senior facilities, train was irrelevant to them. Yeah, there's a goofy little streetcar in Tampa. But the senior centers themselves were operating transit buses door to door. And it's all a marketing problem. At least in Portland, buses get no respect. They're totally second class by the transit entity itself. They're all into steel wheels. Slow, really slow steel wheels that don't go anywhere. But my view is if you put Nike or Columbia Sportswear or Adidas in charge of marketing at TriMet and said the new hip thing is buses, and there's a lot of cool buses out there, and let's buy some of the buses that Obama gets to ride around in. And we actually made a video on our website. You can go on our website where we talked about comparing. We had behind it is a spreadsheet that you can download in which we looked at, well, for $205 million to Milwaukee Light Rail, what can you get? Well, great buses, lots and lots of buses, and DirecTV, and NFL football package, and free coffee, and Wall Street Journal in the morning, and 24 hours a day, and you can't spend it all. So, for a modest amount of money, you could get really nice buses and run some express routes and non-express routes and do all kinds of things if you wanted buses to succeed. They don't want them to succeed.
Since this is expensive, ineffective, and paid for by the taxpayers, is there any sign that the taxpayers have had enough and might revolt?
Yes, they are revolting. One of the counties in the Tri-County region, Clackamas County, is in full revolt. Part of the county has already seceded from the TriMet district. Another part of it is trying to secede. And this newest Milwaukee Light Rail project, with 7.3 miles of light rail to this little 20,000 person community called Milwaukee, spelled differently than Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There will be a ballot measure on the ballot in May, probably, to basically prohibit that line from even entering the county. And yet, our transit district is already building the line. They've clear-cut hundreds of trees. They've condemned property. They've bulldozed property. It's a $1.5 billion project. They're asking $750 million from the feds. The feds haven't given them an answer yet. They're doing all of this on the notion that if they condemn enough property and pour enough concrete and build a whole new bridge, it'll be too big to fail. And they're going to find that it's going to be a YouTube sensation when it turns out they'd spent all this money and they can't get the train to the county it's supposed to go to. The rebellion is fully underway in Portland. People are realizing behind the curtain is just a little guy with some switches.
You seem to be supporting the Los Angeles bus system, the rapid one, and had a very low cost per mile.
Right.
Does that mean that the buses are on the ordinary lanes, and if so, how do they enforce any kind of speed?
Yes. Well, the real key is to recognize that an exclusive bus lane or transit lane is almost never justified. Now, the Almonte busway is a great busway in the LA system. And I used to take the bus sometimes from New Jersey into New York on the Lincoln Tunnel Express
Yeah.
bus, which is the most awesome busway in the whole country. Nothing but buses whizzing by. Yeah, okay, those are all great, but almost no place is that justified. No, the Metro Rapid bus system runs in shared traffic arterials. And the way they get better speed is simply spacing the stops more. Once every mile instead of Portland, it's every 2 blocks. It's
Yeah.
torture
Yeah.
to do that. So you can have, with buses, because the capital costs are tiny, you can have express, semi-express, an infinite array of different types of service sharing the lanes.
Okay.
And we don't need all this
Yep.
money for slow
Yeah.
trains.
Yeah. I got you. Thank you.
So, thanks.
Nice job.